So I think I speak for many pianists, including myself, when I say that sight reading was one of those things where it was very much a case of doing it because you had to for an exam or something like that, and it was a sort of grin and bear it. And then the minute that you didn't have to do it anymore, you probably didn't continue working on it. But being able to sight read well has benefits beyond just getting a good mark in an exam. Most obviously, it means that you can play more pieces, which in itself is a wonderful thing, and also a good complement perhaps to introduce variety. If you're working on other repertoire that's taking you longer to learn, you can supplement that by being able to play other things with sight reading. And as fulfilling as playing for yourself is, playing with others is a wonderful thing too, and being able to sight read well opens up many more possibilities in this regard. And yes, you could go and learn pieces in advance of a chamber music workshop or something like that, but being able to be more spontaneous and flexible through sight reading means that you're far more likely to have opportunities to play with others, and that you'd be able to play something based on who's available at any given time. So it's far less limiting. And then I think it probably stems from the way we're taught, and perhaps aspects of the whole exam preparation process and schooling systems and things like that. But we do tend to think of subjects in silos. So you've got your learning your pieces, your repertoire that you're working on. Then you've got your technique and perhaps scales and things like that. Sometimes there's some overlap there. Then you've got theory, then you've got the other stuff like the oral and sight reading and so on. But all of these things are based on a set of core skills that relate to music making. And sight reading is an incredibly good way to develop some of these essential skills that will give you benefits beyond just being able to sight read. For example, it can help you learn pieces faster. It's really good at helping you develop a sense of rhythm, maintain a pulse, and can also help with things like interpretation by exposing you to different styles and musical elements. So in my experience, sight reading was very much the weakest link in my playing by far. I hadn't done much of it at school because the school I was at was not really that interested in music, and the emphasis was really just on getting through and doing the basic minimum. So sight reading wasn't something that was given much attention. Then when I did have a more focused teacher, I was really behind, and I wanted to pursue music as a career, which meant very much a game of catch-up and focusing on technical deficiencies and learning repertoire for things like auditions and competitions and so on. So something that had more longer-term benefits, like being able to sight read, but not necessarily an immediate benefit in terms of just getting through the next stages of my career plan, was neglected. And so, yeah, this sort of, I guess I had to cut corners, and sight reading was a corner that was cut. So by the time I got to university, I was really deficient. And I guess my experience in university was the world was divided into two camps with regards to sight reading, those who could and those who couldn't. And I was exposed to some exceptional sight readers. And I remember saying to my professor at the time, who could sight read literally anything that was put in front of him, how do you get better at sight reading? And he said, no, if you can't, you can't. It's just something you're born with, really. And so I guess I developed a belief that this was probably the case, especially when I saw how good others were at it. And then I guess on some level I didn't like the fact that I was so deficient, and so I felt that, and it was at some point it was going to hold me back. So I felt like I needed to improve this area. So I spoke to another professor who said to me, who was also a relatively good sight reader, and she said to me, no, she wasn't a natural. It was a case of just practice, practice, practice. And in accompanying other people, she suggested I get a singer to accompany, and that was the way that I would get better. So I resolved to try and spend consistent time on improving my sight reading. But the problem was I was so bad at it that many of the opportunities for improvement were just not an option. For example, accompanying a singer sounds like a brilliant idea, but if you are embarrassingly bad at sight reading, you're just going to be wasting their time. Especially, they could bring you anything, and a lot of the music that I remember having to accompany was staggeringly difficult to learn and practice with a bit of time, let alone play at sight. So that made it difficult from the start. Then I thought, okay, well, what I'm going to do is just be consistent and spend some time sight reading every day. But I didn't really know where to start. It was a very hit and miss approach, and I didn't make much progress. And so I guess I became a bit disillusioned with it, because when faced with other priorities like learning a concerto and things that I could have much more of a tangible impact on in terms of investing time and practicing, Sight reading was always the poor cousin. So I think I kept that for about half a semester, and then just didn't really go any further with it. So I'd formed these two views that, firstly, that sight reading was probably something that you either had or you didn't, and if you didn't have it, you may be able to improve, but the way to do that is you just have to kind of hit your head against a brick wall and hope that you get better. But I've subsequently realized that these beliefs are simply not true. The first, the idea that you can either do something or you can't, I think probably stems from a lot of conditioning that we have, where we're told we're good at certain things and we're not. And there's this obsession with talent being the only driver of success. And so Johnny's good at sport but not good at music, and Bobby is good at music but not good at sport. But I think this is disproven on a daily basis, where we encounter stories of people who achieve things that they're told they wouldn't be able to. And I think we've also realized that while talent is important, there's so many other factors that come together for success. One is obviously hard work. The other is what you do and how you approach it. And another is perhaps also luck. So following from the idea that perhaps one could develop this ability, the other belief that you just got better by doing something, also didn't make much sense, because I think if you are deficient at something and you wanted to do something challenging, surely you need to go about it in the best possible way and have some kind of a strategy or plan. An analogy I use there is, if you're out of shape and you want to get fit and go to the gym and all of that, you don't just go to the gym and throw a few weights around and hope that you improve. At best, you're probably likely to have marginal improvements, but you may also get injured doing that. You probably have a structured eating plan or diet and a training plan that's based on where you are and where you want to get to. And so I guess I realized that with something like sight reading, persistence and effort is important, but it's not just down to how much you do and what you do, but also how you do it. And so I thought there must be a better way than just doing things with that hit and miss approach and trying things and hoping at some point that you get better. So as a result of my failed attempt to improve my sight reading, I was really delighted when a few years ago I was approached by two professors at the Peabody Institute, Ken Johansson and Travis Hardaway, in connection with the sight reading curriculum that they were working on. So their initial project was called Read Ahead, and it was an app plus some books that is essentially a curated set of sight reading exercises and repertoire examples at the elementary to intermediate level. And the idea behind it was that it was supposed to help teachers incorporate sight reading in lessons, and for people to incorporate, and for students or pianists to incorporate it in daily practice. It's something I really wish I'd had access to when I was younger, because I suspect I'd be telling a very different story about sight reading now had that been the case. And while the clue's in the name, it's very much looking at developing reading ahead as a specific skill for underpinning a successful sight reading ability. It goes beyond that and introduces a lot of tips and tools and things that can help one improve one's sight reading. And then subsequently, Ken mentioned to me that he was interested in publishing the curriculum that he'd been developing over the last 20 years that he used to teach sight reading to performance majors, piano majors at the conservatory. And this resonated with me on a personal level, because I was just really thrilled that there was a structured approach to teaching this, and that this could potentially be a better way than my sort of bash your head against a brick wall and hope you get better approach. And so I was really pleased to be able to work with Ken on this project. And because of my personal interest in it, I decided I would also try and use some of the materials myself alongside working on the publishing. And although I didn't have a lot of time to do that, and I used them in a fairly summarized, if you like, way, shallow way, I would say, I still got a lot of benefit out of it, even at that level. And so what I'd like to do now is I suppose just talk a bit more about it, introduce this, the advanced sight reading curriculum, and just share a bit more about my experience and what I got out of it. So before I start, I'll just issue a brief disclaimer in saying that this is a commercial product that I've been working on, and so this isn't a pure, unbiased third-party review. But having said that, I'll be sharing very much my experiences using it as a pianist, and I do believe that those will be useful and interesting, regardless of whether you ever use our product or not. So the curriculum is divided into parts. There's part 1, 2, and we jump to part 4 as the third one that we published. Just there's various reasons why it made sense to do that. And the first part looks at eye training and teaching you where to look and how to move your eyes efficiently. Then the second looks at a concept called flexibility, which is really the distinction between practicing, which focuses on accuracy, and sight reading, which is more about keeping going. And it helps you develop skills that are needed for the latter, i.e. being able to keep going. And then the most recent installment is called Rhythm, and it looks at how to maintain a steady pulse while tackling rhythmic challenges and various difficulties associated with rhythm. So each part is divided up into a set of modules. I think it's usually 4 or 5, and each of these focus on a very specific skill. The skill is explained and introduced, sort of the theory behind it, and then it's put into practice with a really carefully selected set of examples from the repertoire. And it's usually about 10 or 15 of them, in some cases as many as 30. Now, the first thing that became clear to me on using this is that it represents a really clear difference in approach to my hit and miss one, in that it's guided and structured. And what it also does is it allows you to focus on a specific skill at any point in time. So rather than trying to do everything at once, and I think that's what's really daunting with sight reading, is you've got so much to process in one go and so many different things to think about. It's no wonder it's really hard to make progress and really easy to be disillusioned. But what this does is it very cleverly chooses examples and exercises that are very tailored towards teaching a specific skill, and in many other aspects are actually a bit easier so that you can focus on that skill. So an example, I just remember thinking with some of the ones where there were really complicated rhythms and was trying to teach you some ways of dealing with those, the notes weren't all that difficult. So it meant that I could focus on trying to master a specific skill rather than being overwhelmed. Then the other thing that I found with it was the annotations and notes on the examples themselves were really, really helpful. So instead of it just being a case of here's a great concept, now here's a whole lot of examples, just go your own way and try and put that into practice. It's a much more hands-on guided approach. And the annotations and notes and things like that give you all sorts of hints and clues and tips for implementing the ideas that have been introduced. And there'll be things like, for example, marking where to look with your eyes, or giving hints and suggestions around patterns, or suggesting buffering spots, to borrow from internet parlance, like places where you can look ahead or take an opportunity to look ahead in a score. So I found all of those particularly helpful, and I didn't really feel like I was sort of flailing about, or I guess they kind of closed the gap between theory and practice quite nicely. A lot of the examples look really daunting at first, particularly for somebody like me who's, I guess, probably aware of his shortcomings in this area. But I was surprised by how much progress I made. And I think the first ones were actually relatively straightforward. And then they get progressively more challenging. And some of them are really, really hard. But I was quite surprised with the progress, because at one point I realized I am actually, admittedly, quite slowly with lots of wrong notes, or leaving a lot of notes out as well, sight reading a Rachmaninoff prelude. So it was quite it felt like a bit of an achievement, actually. And then, even though a lot of it is challenging, and this is aimed at piano majors at a conservatory, I'm certainly not a piano major at conservatory level at the moment, but I still got a lot out of it. And it's possible to use, firstly, the initial examples, definitely, and then to use some of them, perhaps by making them a bit easier, simplifying them, you can still implement a lot of the ideas and develop those skills. The other thing that I observed that was quite interesting to me is that it's teaching habits, and I think almost like a gut feel or intuitive sense about how to approach sight reading. that yes, you do need to analyze before you play, but you can't be thinking too much while you're playing. There's just not time to process all of the information. And I've realized in watching some good sight readers that this must be how they do it. There's sort of an intuitive sense of what to do and a confidence in their ability and their sort of, their gut instinct. And I realized that even though I don't have that naturally, developing that is probably the most likely path to lead to some kind of improvement. So, and just in summary, I think what I got out of it, admittedly using it in a very superficial way, I saw some tangible progress, and even though it's off an appallingly low base or level, I would say I probably improved my sight reading ability by 50% just by running through it superficially. This then inspired me to spend more time sight reading, because I think just being able to see some results was really, really encouraging. As I mentioned earlier in this video, I also saw benefits in terms of developing other transferable skills or in other areas of my playing. I was definitely able to learn pieces faster, and I've been working on, you've probably seen some of my videos on quick studies. Now, a lot of those quick studies I think have only really been possible for me because I've improved my sight reading a bit. I'm terrible at rhythm, and I found that I've developed a much better ability to deal with rhythms and even things like gauging leaps in more technically challenging things that I'm learning in a more formal way. Then, linked to all of this, and I think some of the improvements that I saw, I've become more confident. While I'm aware I'm not a good sight reader, I was probably a bit too disparaging. And with that confidence, I was able to join a chamber music workshop, it was quite scary, it was quite challenging, but it wasn't a complete disaster, and it's definitely something that it was an incredibly positive experience, and definitely something that I would like to be doing more of as soon as we were able to do that. And lastly, I found that through doing the curriculum, I was exposed to some lovely music. I think the brilliant thing about what Ken's done is not only chosen things that are really good at teaching, or examples that are good for teaching and making the points that he's making, but they're also just wonderful pieces in their own right. And I think Ken mentioned in a workshop that I hosted, co-hosted with him, that playing a new piece of music is like meeting a new friend, and that's one of the wonderful things about sight reading, is it makes it possible to meet many new friends. So I think, I've discovered some new composers and repertoire that I'll definitely be wanting to play more of. So basically, this video was, I guess, a brief introduction to the advanced sight reading curriculum and also my own personal experience of trying to improve my sight reading abilities. And I'm going to follow on from the video with a set of videos that will provide a more detailed guided tour of the individual modules of the advanced sight reading curriculum. And in that, I'll be sharing how I used it and some of what I got out of it and some of the ideas and tips and things that I found really useful. Now, my intention for doing this is, if you, like me, got disillusioned trying to improve your sight reading and would really like to improve it, I'd basically just like to show that there is a better way or a viable way for improving and making progress. And although I am mentioning a very specific product here that, as I've mentioned, I've worked on, you don't need to be using that product specifically. I'm obviously delighted if you did give it a try, but I think that some of the ideas that I share should be of interest and of use to you, regardless of what material you work with. And lastly, although I'm not a good sight reader, I've got a long way to go, I found that working on my sight reading was a really, really fulfilling and rewarding endeavor in its own right. And I'd really like to encourage other pianists to do this too. Not just for the sake of sight reading, which in itself is a wonderful thing to be able to do, but also in terms of the positive impact that it can have of, I guess, other areas of your playing and your overall enjoyment of your playing.